Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis. I'm a marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor trained in trauma and addiction. The Asking Why podcast is for anyone on a journey of healing and restoration. If you are searching for answers to life's questions and want to learn more about root causes from a psychological and theological mix, this show is for you. In this podcast, myself and a co-host from Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness will interview guests on a wide range of topics in order to get down to the heart of the problems facing our world and understand why things happen and how to change the world and ourselves for the better. Want to learn more tips and tricks to living a healthy lifestyle? Visit us at Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to meet our staff or book a speaker, go to clintdaviscounseling.com. Thanks for listening and be sure to subscribe today. All right, Sarah Teutsch, welcome.
Hi.
Asking Why podcast, episode 21.
Awesome. That's so exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's been crazy. It's been a good start. So we're going to talk a little bit about poverty today and about maybe some myths and some misconceptions that people have about poverty and people in poverty. Talk about the Lovewell Center here in Shreveport. Talk about maybe what people can do in their areas to help people in poverty, to help people who are in low income from a ministry perspective, but just in general as a kind of culture and a country, bring some awareness to those in need and what we can all do to help with that. So
yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. So tell us who you are and kind of what you do. And
so my name is Sarah Teutsch, and I am the director of the Lovewell Center, which is one of two programs under the Hub Urban Ministries. So that is my day-to-day as far as work goes. I also was born and raised in Shreveport, left for like 5 minutes, and came back and am married to Luke Teutsch. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, shout out to Luke.
Yeah, shout out to Luke. And so as far as the Lovewell Center goes, I have been working there for, the Lovewell is going to be 8 years this year, which is so amazing. So I've been on staff since January of 2013, but have been around since the beginning of the hub. Yeah. So
you said you're a Shreveport native?
I am.
Right. And so where did you leave for a minute?
So I left my freshman year of college. I went to school at Baylor, started there, and then it was one of those, I had to get there to realize that wasn't where I was supposed to be. Really it was just I knew that God had called me to work with individuals experiencing homelessness and poverty, but I didn't know what that was going to look like at all. At that point, the Hub was just a very small formed nonprofit with Cassie and another employee. And so where it is now is amazing. But we just had no idea what it was going to be. Right. And so I left thinking well, maybe I should have a plan B, in case that doesn't work. So I went to Baylor and studied graphic design. And then about 3/4 of the way through that semester, I called my parents and I was like, I think I need to come home. And they were like, I thought you loved it. And I was like, I was faking the whole time. Just thinking maybe you give yourself a time to adjust. Oh, absolutely. But it was more of just I knew that I was trying to create the path that God had already set for me. But I, was trying to give myself some sort of backup plan. Yeah. Instead of
square peg, round hole.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So for those listening, so I work at the Hub as well. I'm the director of recovery, and I do that very part-time on the, kind of help talk with you. And we meet, and I meet with Cassie, and we all kind of figure this out together. But we've been friends forever. You're also a Christian counselor, right? Mm-hmm. You had pastoral counselor, and you were on staff with us for a while.
I was.
Before you got to become big director of the Lovewell.
Yes.
So take us back, kind of what's your story when it comes to ministry, and how did you get into the idea of poverty?
Yeah. So I was introduced really to, larger populations of those experiencing homelessness when I was in high school. Shout out to Captain Shreve. And I was in this service organization called Z Club. Okay. And basically you just go and you serve in other parts of the city, and that's really just the foundation of the club. And so I had been doing a couple things here and there, and Cassie, Hammond's younger sister, Abby, is the same age as I am, and we grew up together. And so she was like, hey, my sister's kind of doing this thing where she's going downtown and just hanging out with people. Do you want to come? And I'm like, sure.
Completely naive.
Yeah, completely. Like, literally just sounds cool. I'm going to get some hours and hang out with people. So, at that point, it literally was Cassie and her husband and just a trailer, tables and chairs, and just hanging out in parking lots downtown. And, Cassie has had her own journey into, just being obedient to God and not even realizing that the hub was going to be a nonprofit. It was just her answering what God was asking her to do. But part of that was that there was like this influx of individuals that were homeless after Hurricane Katrina, and just seeing a larger population in the downtown area. And, so that's kind of where some of that is rooted in, just trying to meet a need and build relationships. And so I went, and, I don't know if this is odd or just, the Holy Spirit, but it didn't feel weird to me. Like, it was just like, oh, this is just, part of
what you do,
what I do. Yeah. And so I think it was really cool because, I didn't even realize things like social work. I didn't know what that was until I was a freshman in college. And so just went and hung out, and just really enjoyed getting to meet people. And it was really amazing because there was also a group of other high school students from other schools that were interning for the hub. And so they really became like my core group of friends, and just seeing like all of us had this same heart, the same drive to help people, but hang out with people and it not feel like this separation for life. Luke and I talk all the time about moments, way back then, which is like 10 plus years ago, which is crazy. And thinking like, there were certain Saturdays where we didn't have, an event or anything like that, and going like, well, what am I supposed to do? And this is me at 17, 18 years old going like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. We don't have anything going on, and obviously would still, maybe go and hang out with one individual or something like that. But so it didn't feel like this big stretch for me. And again, I don't necessarily know why that is, other than just, that is the moment that God was like, yeah, this is where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so I think it was also cool because a lot of, again, the misconceptions and the myths that we'll be talking about today, really resonated with me in my own personal journey of exploring my own self-worth and value, especially through self-image and growing up, which, I'm happy to elaborate on. But also...
Yeah, go ahead.
Just this idea of perfection as well.
Yeah.
So, I grew up and was born with a birth defect. And so that meant that I have a very large scar on my stomach. It's really prominent, like you can't miss it. And just really from an early age was having to grapple with, growing up and what do people think about me. And, just like every elementary through high school kid, you're figuring out your place and, what makes me unique, but not like in a way that I feel like I'm standing out from other people. And so I really had to work through that, along with being born with, missing fingers through my umbilical cord being wrapped around my fingers. And so, as a girl, and I understand guys struggle with as well, but like as a girl, you're just growing up and you're just asking yourself, like what makes me special, because I feel like these things that I have are odd.
Well, in the whole culture, right, especially for women, is so much more predominantly focused on looks and outward appearance and, all the what's attractive and what's going to get you a mate and marriage. And yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. So, I went through periods where I was very adamant on hiding my hand and not wanting other people to see it. Like, I remember sitting on my hand in class, or I remember we had in middle school these things called yearbook day. And it was like at the end of the year, and you'd get to go outside and hang out, and everybody would sign yearbooks. In the summer here, it's 100+ degrees, but that didn't stop me from wearing a sweatshirt just so that I could cover my hand. And just, wanting to wear a one-piece swimsuit because I didn't want to see my stomach, all these things. And so as I was getting into high school, that's when I really kind of had to process more and understand, like, those things aren't things that make me any less worthy of good relationships or of calling myself beautiful or any of those things. And so I do believe that there is a sense of, like, I may not understand your situation when it comes to homelessness, but I do understand what it's like to feel different, and just want to blend in or just feel normal, and not feel a sense of, like, isolation through your circumstances. And so I think those are some of the feelings, like, for me, if someone feels lonely, like, that's like my breaking point where I'm like, I can't handle that, and
or isolated,
isolated,
outcast.
Yes, exactly. And so I think those were a lot of the things that I was wrestling with, along with, beginning to take my faith for myself. I did grow up in a Christian household, and had this really cool opportunity to see my parents really take their relationship with Jesus for themselves, and explore what it meant to follow the Holy Spirit and to listen to Him. And so when I was entering into high school and kind of, seeing now, there's this other group of kids that, like, their faith is super important to them as well. And just feeling the freedom to really explore that. And claim that as my own at that point too. So all of those things kind of culminated in this desire for me to, like, help people, but in a way that meant more of, like, we have a friendship and a bond, and then there's support that comes through that and figuring it out together. Yeah.
How did your parents handle your hand situation and your scar when it came to, like, kind of words of affirmation or support, or did that play a positive role? Was that difficult? Was it just not addressed?
No, it was definitely addressed. It was very much always positive affirmations. Like, there was empathy and understanding, like, that is hard to have to go through that. But they were also very supportive and challenged me to still put myself out there, even when I felt my own inadequacies. So, I did grow up doing dance and cheerleading and soccer, and so I didn't ever feel a sense of, like, I had to hide myself fully. But I think too, it was more of just, like, I would rather someone just be like, hey, what's up with your hand, or than, like, see their eyes gaze, and, like, that's for me where I go, like, oh, I would rather them just acknowledge it than, like, I feel this awkward, like, I know that but you're not saying anything.
What an incredible tie-in to, like, somebody on the side of the road with a sign. And one of the things I talk about all the time with my kids and then just people is, like, and I know we'll get into this, but it's like the least thing you can do is roll the window down and say, hey man, I'm praying for you, the Lovewell's down there, we know, here's a card, here's a thing we can do. And just acknowledging that the worst thing you can do is see them, they know that you see them, and then just ignore them as a human being. So that's such a cool tie-in. I'm sure you thought of that before, but it just hits me.
Actually I hadn't. So that is a really cool tie-in. And so I had, like, there was a lot of things I had to work through, and I remember being in college and feeling like, oh, I'm in this good place now. Like I feel confident in, myself. And, I've had friends who've been like, honestly, I didn't even realize, that your hand was the way it was.
I didn't notice it for like a year.
Right. Yeah. So I've had people do that. So I'm sure to some extent it's also like the self-pressure I've put on myself.
Absolutely.
100%. But I remember being on a mission trip in Haiti with Centenary College. That's where I went to college, and we had to complete this like learning module where you go and visit another culture, you just understand different things. And so we got to partner with I believe it was some of the missions team through First Methodist. And so we went down there and we were working with an existing organization that was already there, and doing some learning and teaching from different orphanages. And I remember this moment where several kids like noticed my hand, and then the next thing I know, I had like 30 kids around me all looking at my hand and were like, just curious, obviously, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But like I couldn't really communicate with them. And so that was probably one of the biggest heightened moments of my life where I was like, I just want to disappear in this moment. Like, everybody's looking at me, and then I'm feeling this sense of like, I've got to, like, I don't want people to think that this is affecting me. So then I've got to like act like it's not, because the like adults or people in our group are probably seeing this is going on. And so that was like that was kind of, it felt like, oh, we haven't fully worked through that yet. So we've got to do that now that this has happened. And I've continued to do so.
Of course. We have those moments, right? All the time. We think we work through something fully, and then we have to check back in.
Right. Yeah. They're like, let's just amplify it times 10 and then see how you do with that.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So for those listening, kind of tell us about, so it started as kind of a on the ground movement of just hanging out, people being social, people who love Jesus going, hey, we're going to go out and help people in poverty.
Yeah.
You have this tie-in from your own insecurities, your own stuff. The other thing I was going to mention was, as parents, if you're a parent listening, it's such an important thing to remember that you can do all the right things. You can love your kids with whatever their differences are. And obviously there's a better way to do it. It sounds like your parents did a great job.
Yeah.
But regardless, we have to work those things out ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's something I think parents want the answer, like, okay, I have a kid with a disability or anxiety or depression or, ADHD. I need to do all these things so they turn out without any suffering, without any difficulty, without any insecurity.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, like, if you look at the Garden of Eden, God did that for us. He provided a completely safe environment, loved us unconditionally, and we still had to figure it out on our own. And so it's just a reminder when you were saying it, I was like, wow, for my own self as a parent, like, I can do the best I can, and I can help my kids with their struggles and their issues, but they're still going to have to work it out with God and their own identity. And
yeah, I mean, and that was without the internet or social media or anything. Like, I cannot even imagine. Yeah, that's
a train wreck.
Yeah.
That's where we're at, right?
And that's a whole other
podcast. No, but it's a good point. So tell us kind of how it moved from street ministry kind of to the Lovewell.
So, like you mentioned, it was very just grassroots and just showing up. And I think part of Cassie's heart was like recognizing that there were many church members that she knew of that were wanting to connect with those experiencing homelessness, and be able to provide and support through needs, but didn't really know like a way to do that. And so she was kind of an avenue of like, hey, I met this individual, they've got this need or are really looking for some sort of community or support. I know you are wanting to provide that. And then her like, bringing the two together. And so just naturally over time, Cassie came to this realization of like, oh, like this is supposed to be more than just what it's been. And that's how it formulated into becoming a full nonprofit.
Right.
And then over the years, it's morphed into, us having our organization as the hub, and then the two distinct programs, Purchase Not for Sale and the Lovewell, underneath that, and each having their own set of staff, but all of us, representing the hub as one is how that's worked out.
Yeah, I know. I guess me and you met. This is the first time we met on the mission trip in New Orleans.
That's my earliest memory that I have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. We were just going door to door, passing out flyers for that thing in the park. And then, unless I was doing stuff, I must not have been doing stuff for the hub before then. I must have connected after that. But regardless, I remember going to the Fairmont apartment. Well, before the Fairmont, I remember going out to street outreach and going to the different apartments and different parts of the city and passing out flyers and asking kind of people, what do you need? And then we went to the Fairmont and we're playing bingo down there in the bottom. And we do bingo and meet with people and pray with people. And then that turned into going up into people's apartments and sitting with them. And that was just, it was a lot like you, being a therapist, but also just my personality. That was just totally normal.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, just hang out. I mean, it got wild, but
right.
It does. But it was this is totally normal. And then I remember Cassie starting to talk about hey, the reason we're doing this is because we're collecting information for this Lovewell Center that we're going to actually take that and give them what they need, from their mouths versus what we think they need.
Right, exactly.
So can you talk a little bit about the Lovewell Center and how it's different from maybe other things that, people provide for poverty, whether it's food or resources or whatever?
So the Lovewell Center is a membership-based resource center for individuals that are experiencing homelessness and poverty. So we see individuals that come through our doors that are living on the streets, that are maybe couch surfing, meaning they're living in, one friend's home, and then the next few nights they're at a family member and back to another friend, or, just kind of transient. Also individuals that are maybe staying in a shelter somewhere. And then we also have individuals that come through that are living in low-income housing or working minimum wage jobs. And so it functions very much like a resource and community center. And so when individuals come to the Lovewell, they can sign up for a membership card. And the hub's mission is give everyone in our city access to restored life. So even though we see populations, mainly of those that are homeless and in physical poverty, the Lovewell is open and available to anyone. And so those individuals come through the doors and then they sign up for a free membership card. It looks just like a debit card with a strip on the back. And they sign up and are input into our computer system where we keep track of their points. So individuals receive this membership card with 20 points, and they can use those points to spend in our clothing store, which is called the Dresswell, clothing and hygiene, to do laundry, which is our Smellwell, and to shop in our food store called the Eatwell. We're, very clever with those names. And so throughout the week, individuals have opportunities to attend classes that are specifically related to your relationship with God, yourself, others, and creation. They can attend those classes as a way to just learn and engage, but also to earn more points. We also have free meal events that happen throughout the week. In our main space, we have computers and a TV and just a hangout spot for people. And then we also provide individual assistance, member care is what we call it, where we meet one-on-one with someone and either offer them assistance that we can provide or we connect them to another organization. And so what's different about the Lovewell, though, one is that we are the only organization that individuals that aren't just homeless can come to throughout the week. There's a very big population of just poverty in Shreveport in general, like 25% of our city. And so there's a lot of teetering on the brinks of homelessness for people. And just also sometimes, when an individual moves from homelessness into housing or has some sort of income, the support or the resources they were able to access when they were homeless aren't available anymore for various reasons. And so to be able to provide a place for people to come and, their name is known. We just have fun. We have parties, and everybody loves Tuesday bingo.
That's right.
Tuesday bingo. And so it just is this idea of creating community for people where they may not have it otherwise. And we have this earning-based model of our Lovewell points because we really just wanted individuals to know, like, in the midst of their situations, they still have worth and value, not for anything that they have or haven't done, but because they're made in the image of God. And just providing some opportunities for ownership to say, like, even in the midst of your situations, like, you have the opportunity to decide how you want to spend your points, what you want to spend them on, the classes that you attend. Like, there is still a part that you can play in your recovery and whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I love that, it's about autonomy and empowerment, and that people get to kind of use their points for what they need. They have to earn them to use them.
Right.
I think that's very different than a lot of systems.
Yeah, and that's something, we were really worried. I remember this very clearly. We were really worried when we came up with this concept. Are people gonna... Are people going to respond to that? Like, are they going to be willing to, do the points? And it was interesting, though, because the thoughts first came after having a couple individuals, over time be like, hey, I really need this thing. Like, if you let me do X, Y, or Z, then, like, could you get that for me? Like, almost like an exchange of, like, hey, I want to put forth something because I don't want it just for free. Yeah. And so incorporating that idea, even after all this time, I think is... for those who haven't been around the Lovewell, maybe a volunteer or someone who just comes in for the first time as a member, it can feel a little like foreign. Like, that's, not usually what ends up happening. Right, yeah. Right. And part of that is, just trying to instill, like, that is real world. And so we're bringing some of that into here. Now, obviously, if there is... a crisis situation and someone is in need of food or clothing and they don't have any points, like, we're gonna provide for that.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been there 100 times when somebody walks in like, hey, can I get a bottle of water, can I have some coffee, or can I have the it's not that, like,
right. Yeah, there's definitely grace in it for sure, and there's also hard love too.
Absolutely.
So
we've been working on the VIP stuff and, like, coming up with boundaries. We can talk about that, but it's that weird balance in our culture of, we have this welfare system in which people can just get what they want to, and we see the problem with that, although we still love people and want them to be helped. And then you have this total, other side where it's like everybody needs to work and earn it, and they don't deserve it unless they do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And I think y'all do a very, very amazing job of being in the middle, of being like, okay, we're going to have grace and mercy, but we also have to do what's best for everybody in the whole. Yeah. And if we let you take 2 cases of water and we have 4 cases of water to be nice and to be like Jesus, then no one has any cases of water, and then we're all suffering.
Yeah. We're also, like, fighting against that scarcity mentality and just that survival mindset that a lot of individuals that are experiencing homelessness and even physical poverty are facing, where you're just thinking, like, what can I hoard, or what can I get now that is going to tie me over, because I'm not necessarily sure if or when I'm going to have this opportunity again, which is very funny because a lot of Americans experienced that this past year. And so, even just trying to remind people, like, hey, we're going to be here tomorrow. So, it's okay for you to just get what you need today, because it will be available tomorrow. And, having the understanding, though, helps me to see, like, it's not just someone who's trying to take. It's like there is this neurological wiring that has happened that is causing their brain to go, like, I need this now. And part of that being because they may not know when they're going to have that opportunity again. And it's funny you mentioned, like, the welfare system and this idea of people receiving, government benefits and things like that. Just like with anything, we really only hear what's amplified, and that forms our thoughts and opinions about things. So most of the time you're only hearing about the negative side of the welfare program, or people being able to receive food stamps or whatever that looks like.
Steak and lobster with their Louisiana Purchase card or whatever.
Exactly. And, so you're not going to see like how it actually is working for some individuals. But there are bad seeds and bad apples and everything in this world,
Yeah. I mean, I know, your point is that most people are not taking advantage of the system.
Right.
And I remember having a client when I was working in California, and he was making like $900, a month on SSI. And then he was getting a discount on his apartment. He was getting food stamps. He was doing all these things. And so as I'm working with him, he got a job at Dillard's, and he was going to be making like $1,500.
Yeah.
But then he lost all of that if he took the job. And then I think he had 2 kids, and he was going to have to put them in daycare to work 40 hours a week at Dillard's or whatever it was. And it was just like, he didn't take the job because none of it made any sense.
Yeah.
And the idea that like people out there, they would just take the job, for the greater good or whatever mentality they have, like it's insanity. Like, no, you wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a huge part of, understanding or taking the time to understand and think through someone else's perspective. I'm viewing everything through my middle class lens because that's how I've grown up, but for someone who's grown up with a different lens, doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. It just means it's different.
Yeah.
And so taking the time to think through that, because the job at Dillard's, like, yeah, you're making a lot more money, but also like there's not the promise of stability if you take the Dillard's job.
Absolutely. And you lose your discount on your housing.
You lose your discount.
You don't get your food stamps. Like,
Right.
so you actually don't make, even on paper, you make less money, and you have to work 40 hours a week.
Yeah. Now, I do understand like why someone would take the government benefits or, their housing discount. I think part of it is trying to help people realize like the importance of stewardship and work as well. And so, there's such gray in everything. Even though my personality is very black and white. But, so it is a very individualized moment. In this past year and a half, worked really closely with an individual through the Lovewell VIP Club, which is a support network for individuals that have moved from homelessness to housing. And we provide opportunities for community, accountability, growth, and friendship. We meet every week on Thursdays, and individuals, work through different goals. They take specific VIP club classes. They have member perks. And that's something, obviously, Clint, that you're really working with me on specifically, fine-tuning some things. But there was an individual who she's graduated VIP club this past December. But she was one where when we first met her 4+ years ago, she came to the Lovewell after having experienced a mental breakdown and, was unable to work and was really just trying to pick up the pieces. And she would come to the Lovewell and she would stand at the front counter, and that's literally as much as she would do. She would just stand there for maybe 10 to 20 minutes, and then she would leave and go back to her apartment. And, over time, slowly saw her move to the point where now she's sitting in the back of the Lovewell, which is not as close to the exit. And she would sit there, hang out for a little bit longer, would start to have conversations with me, and eventually got to the point where she wanted to apply for the VIP club. And so, had her in the VIP club. She worked through the first 2 of 5 phases, and then got to this point where, it just she wasn't ready for it yet. So she left and, stopped being a part of the VIP club, would still come around the Lovewell every now and then, but just kind of kept like talking with her, encouraging her, letting it be her timing, not, the timing that I felt was necessary,
right.
which is not always easy, but
Yep.
it's the way to do it. And she eventually restarted the VIP club again, and we got through the phase that she had left, which was such a huge milestone and so cool to see for her. And then get to this part in the fourth phase where you're really starting to look at the concept of creation and stewardship and the call that God has given us to own and manage. And part of that being exploring the idea of work. And maybe that looks like employment. Maybe that looks like going back to school or finding a place to volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
And, she had kind of expressed that she was interested in work, but she had spent a really long time working to get her disability. I'm talking went through the appeals process and all of that stuff. And so it was a really big deal that she had it. And, I asked her to just think about the idea. I didn't say let's pursue it. I'm just let's just think about it. And even that would send her into a spiral because there's just so much unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we continued to move forward, just little by little, she kind of started to open up herself to the idea of that. And thankfully, there is this program called Ticket to Work, where individuals can apply to be a part of. It is a government program where basically, if someone has been receiving government assistance, they can become a part of this program to then apply to work. And it kind of just slowly weans some of that income they're receiving monthly from the government so it doesn't get taken at once.
Right.
And then if they lose that job, then it's an easier process for that income to be reinstated versus her having to completely reapply and them go, oh, well, we see that you've worked before, so you don't need this. And, for her, stepping out into work was a really big leap of faith because of what she had experienced from her mental breakdown and just some different variables that were part of that. But she eventually got to the point where she wanted to apply for work, and she went out and got a job, and she's at this place now where she's working full time, and she, has moved herself out of her Section 8 housing, which is 811, which is for disability, to have a place of her own. But I mean, that was a 6-year process.
Wow.
That was 6 years.
Yeah. I think
6 years. And so, so amazing to get to walk that journey with her and know that that it wasn't my timing, in my head, success was her finishing the program out the first time, but that's not the plan that God had for her.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it's just really neat to be able to experience that. But oftentimes people think, oh, you just go out and get a job, it's not that hard. And I'm if you knew all the extra variables, I'm not saying it's not important for people to have a job or work or whatever, but it's not as easy as what you think.
Well, and that speaks to the culture that we're in right now. And it's part of why we're doing this podcast today is for people who, I think people have great intentions and great hearts, but they don't know anything.
Yeah.
And so with bad information, people don't do anything.
Right.
Because they, they don't understand. They're not enabling or, it's not as simple as just getting a job. And and I think that's the call of us as Christians, and like you do every day, is you actually know these people. Mm-hmm. You actually get involved in it. You see them. And so you have this understanding of the systems that other people don't.
Yeah.
And so, part of, the work that y'all do is always so incredible because you do get to model that and walk through it. And one of the things I love about doing stuff at the Lovewell, and, I've taught classes and come down there and served, and is, man, the people are awesome.
They are.
They're my favorite people.
Yeah.
I would much rather hang out at the Lovewell with people consistently than I would even some of my friends some days, or church especially.
Yeah.
Because you get to know people over 7-8 years, and you get to see them, because a lot of people just come and hang out now.
Yeah.
Because they like it.
Right. Exactly. People that have, moved on from a time in their life where they, quote unquote need the Lovewell, and it's more of they just want to be there, and they've come back and volunteer, or we've had people who've come and turned their Lovewell membership card back into us, and we're like, I don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
Which is
how many points did somebody have? I can't remember. Didn't somebody have 600 or 6,000
yeah.
points?
We've got some people who've got points that are going to last them a lifetime for
Yeah.
sure, But also just seeing, it's interesting because my coworker Joel and I were having this conversation recently. We had a Lovewell member who, he's older in age, and he was having some trouble breathing and just was like not able to catch his breath. So we ended up calling EMT just to come and check on him, and seeing like the number of Lovewell members that rallied around to make sure that he was okay. And then when it was known that like he was going to need to go to the hospital, it was like a no hesitation that one of our Lovewell members who drives was like, I'm going to go, like I'm going to be there. And I was like, that was so cool to see someone respond that quickly. But it was also, even for me, another reminder of like, why would I be surprised by that though?
Yeah.
Like, why am I surprised by people being nice or
like being human?
Being human,
Yeah.
yeah. But I think it's just because there's such this idea of like, this is the box that individuals that are homeless are in, and what they look like, and how they act, or even individuals in poverty, physical poverty. And so anything outside of that is like somehow this like revolutionary thing, but it's like, no, that's just how it's always been. We just haven't chosen to see it in that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like you said, you see the outliers or the extremes,
Right.
and that then defines the whole group. And we've always done that, but in 2021 as we sit, we're worse and worse and worse at that. To say, oh, these are women, or these are men, or these are homosexuals, or these are people in poverty, or these are whatever, and because you say you are that, or you live in that world, like this is you.
Right.
And that means this, or Christian or non-Christian or whatever. And I think you're right. Like that's the other thing I love about the Lovewell is that we have these structures, and the hub in general, is we have these structures that are super important that we've defined to make sure that the majority of people are getting taken care of. But then like we also take individual cases case by case, and you know that you have to make exceptions based on different people.
Yeah, like there are some Lovewell members that we know just are not in a space to be able to sit down in a class and earn points. And so we get unique, and we create a different opportunity. Or, in this last year, you and I have worked really hard on a kind of like a course correction.
Yeah.
And, I really have wanted us to move away from this idea of someone never being able to come back to the Lovewell again, because we do have some interesting situations that happen there. And going, it's not that we don't want you here. It's that at this time, you just do not have the ability to handle all that the Lovewell has. And so, we still love you, and we're still supporting you, and we'll help you through whatever. We still consider you family, but at this time, it's best for you to work out some things, and us help you figure out working out those things, and you take initiative, and then we work on, bringing you back in and accessing the Lovewell at a greater level.
Well, it's so important. I think that's the balance, right? Is that you can you actually love someone more when you do that. When you hold them accountable, when you tell them you believe they can be better than what they're being. Here are the resources in which to do that, but we're not going to let you abuse or take advantage of the system.
Right.
And I think sometimes people are like, well, that's unloving. And it's like, no, that's the definition of loving.
Right.
It is unloving would be to let them self-destruct and be enabled and not grow and not take responsibility.
Yeah, and I think,
but that's hard to do. And I know for you especially, like your heart's like as big as this room, and it's like, I think that if I'm going to therapize a little bit, right, it goes back to that. Oh man, I'm abandoning them. I'm making them feel isolated. I'm ostracizing them. And we know the gospel says that we've been adopted and we've been taken in, regardless of our, hair loss or our hands or whatever, thing that we have going on in our lives, our sin, our brokenness. And the reality is like, it seems like when you're taking that stance, you're saying the opposite.
Right. Yeah.
But you're not just saying you can't come. You're saying you're choosing not to.
Yeah.
We want you here. We love you. And really, that is also the gospel.
Yeah.
God is saying, I love you unconditionally. I'm going to be here for you. I'm never going to leave you, and I'm never going to stop loving you.
Yeah.
But if you're going to experience me fully, there's some things you're going to have to give up.
Right.
And some things you're going to have to adjust.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I think one of the hardest things to grapple with is the idea that there are just going to be some individuals that are never going to be able to move past or, to move forward. Like, in the sense that I know that God can work miracles, and in those situations would be miracle situations, because, you know, you can offer all the support and you can offer the phone number, or you can have an understanding of why maybe somebody's thought process is the way it is. And so you offer the assistance in a way that is actually going to set them up for success. And that's still not enough.
Yep.
Yeah. And that is really hard.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
really hard.
I mean, I think that's the crux of what is hard for everybody doing anything when it comes to people, with our kids, with our spouses, and relationships and friendships, is when you offer all of yourself and all the things you can, and it's said right and it's done right, and the person still has free will, which again I think ties it beautifully back into the gospel narrative of like, you can be I mean, I learned that lesson. I probably said this on here before, but I'm a 2 wing 3. And so like, I think, or have thought in the past, if I just love people, if I'm consistent, if I support people, if I make them feel good about themselves, they'll feel good about themselves and they'll do great things. Yeah. And it's like, that is not how it works. Yeah. You know, and I don't remember if it was my therapist or somebody who I was, you know, getting guidance from, but I was saying that like, and it was a relationship situation, and I was like, you know, I'm loving him, I'm being consistent, I'm going above and beyond, and he just keeps crapping on me essentially. And the guy, I think it was probably my therapist, he was like, well, how'd that work out for Jesus? Right. Because in my head I was like, well, I'm being Christ-like, and that should somehow motivate this person to feel loved and then be healthier. And it's like, no, that sometimes can end up getting you killed. Right. Yeah. And I had this connection where I was like, oh man, like my philosophy about this is all wrong, but it's so hard.
It is. It's really hard. I think too, it's like, you know, choosing that tough love means that we're going to have to feel some sort of tension within us that we don't want to experience. Yep. And so it's like easier to just give in, or to avoid the conflict, or to just, you know,
let people walk away with whatever they want.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah.
But then they just keep doing it.
Right. Yeah. And in the end, like you're saying, that's not loving for anyone in the picture. You know, that's me doing more harm and not, you know, trying to help someone reach their fullest potential of who God has created them to be. Yeah. So, it's an everyday though, kind of like it's an everyday check in and reevaluate what I'm doing.
Well, let's talk about poverty a little bit from a biblical perspective and then just a general. So that people are listening, they're like, well, I hear all these things, but I don't even know what that means, right? I don't want to assume. So what would you say is poverty, the definition of poverty for you, and then what's kind of the biblical definition of poverty?
So in general, at least in the U.S., poverty is often viewed through a sense of lacking, and usually that's played out in your basic needs like food, water, and shelter. Very materialistic view, which is not wrong, but that's not the full capacity of it. Right. So that's why oftentimes I use the phrase physical poverty, because there is that side of it, but you know, the Bible shows us that poverty occurs through oppression, which, you know, I think obviously one of the biggest stories from the Old Testament was the Israelites and them experiencing oppression through the hands of the Egyptians, and them even leaving Egypt and wanting to go back after being in the wilderness and experiencing that poverty mentality. You also see poverty occur through calamity, or like just natural disasters, so very situational things, you know. COVID-19 is situational, house fire, domestic violence, this winter storm that we've just experienced. You know, I heard a story through another organization that we work closely with, how someone was working and paying rent at and I think it was an apartment, or they were staying in a motel, and because the banks were closed, they couldn't get to the bank to get their rent check to be able to pay their rent, and they got kicked out because they couldn't do that, but it was out of their hands. So that's another example, but or type of poverty and how that can really occur. And then thirdly, the Bible talks about like personal moral failures, which I think is the one that everyone likes to
assumes is everybody's reason for being poor.
Yes. Yeah. And, it's what have you done that's caused you to be in poverty. And I think that is definitely the definition that people, like you're saying, assume and go to first, when really a lot of times all three of those, oppression, calamity, and personal moral failures, are at work. Yeah. And so it's a lot more of a interwebbed kind of explanation, for sure.
Yeah, I always think of the story of like, privilege, right? That's a hot word right now. But the reality is that like when like I get a flat tire, because of all these extra things that are going on in my life, it's not really that much of a consequence. It's more of an inconvenient.
Yes.
But I'm working hard and doing all the right things and balancing my checkbook, but somebody who's in poverty, they could be doing all the right things, but that flat tire means 100 more things than it does for me.
Yeah. I mean, it could mean that either they have no support system at all, and so there's not that person they can call on the fly to come and help fix their tire and get them back on the road in 20 minutes. It could also mean they don't have the ability to afford to call someone to, like a tow truck or somebody to come and fix that. But it could also mean that maybe the support system that they do have, the majority of those individuals are also in lower income status brackets, and so they don't necessarily have the ability to provide the money that would be needed or the transportation to come and help you either. So, and obviously we're using these in very generalized terms, like that's not every individual situation that's in physical poverty, but and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like I'm going to naturally view everything through a middle class lens.
Yeah, just do this.
Yeah, just do this.
How many people say that, right?
Right,
it's like,
exactly.
If they would just do this, all these other problems would go away.
Yeah. And that's a completely different ballgame when you're playing from another team.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that metaphor was very interesting that I just used.
It was good though.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I don't know where it came from.
Playing from another team.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. So tell me, well, we talked about that a little bit, but like, so if the answer isn't everybody just had a moral failure, why is it that people end up in homelessness?
Yeah. So.
And I'll never forget this because I want to give a shout out to my father. So one of the things that I remember from him, we were in Pineville at a red light. There's a homeless guy. And I was like 12, and I said some off-the-cuff comment about him, maybe get a job, probably something. And I remember him like telling me distinctly, you never know what this person went through. He could have been a veteran, and kind of laid this story out just at the red light that I'd never thought, and I never forgot that story. But the average person, they assume a lot of things about why people end up homeless. So for you who work with people every day, thousands of people come through the Lovewell. Can you tell the average listener what the actual reality is?
Yeah. I think that for a lot of individuals, if I was going to kind of just sum it up, it would be that they had one left turn, or they had one incident that was caused by someone else or something else that moved them into experiencing homelessness or poverty. And, to elaborate more on that, I mean that, I think you can take an individual situation just like you can any other life and strip all of that back and go, what are the beliefs that I have about myself? Where have I experienced brokenness in my relationship, either with God or myself or other people or creation? And those being kind of the frameworks of realizing like we all experience poverty to some degree, whether that's relationally, spiritually, economically, and that really just kind of creating this avenue to understand, like when I'm thinking about a person's situation and why they ended up where they did, there were probably some choices that they made that weren't healthy. Maybe there was some addiction that was in play. maybe they didn't have the support system to help them move forward as quickly as you and I would. But also they're individuals who have their own story, who are not a statistic, who are not a stereotype, that are just trying to figure out life like everyone else.
Yeah.
And they're not a villain. And, you know, they don't need to be viewed in that light either.
Yeah, I mean, they don't need to be vilified so we feel better about ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think, and we talked about this 100 times, but I think one of the best things people can do is assume the best, right? Is to see a person with a sign and not assume he's just trying to get beer and he's just, if he would just do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But it's to wonder gracefully, wow, I wonder what's going on with this person.
Yeah.
I wonder what their story is. And you and I know when you sit down with them and you hear their story, you're like, oh, yeah, I would totally have ended up in poverty as well.
Right, exactly.
Like, it's rare that somebody comes in, you know, the Lovewell, and then we're like, oh, yeah, you totally should have a job and be super successful.
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, our staff say all the time, like, if I had gone without food or proper sleep or interactions with someone over an extended period of time, I don't necessarily know how I would respond either. I can say how I would now, but that's because I'm well fed. I've had sleep, you know, I've had interactions with other people, but I think to approach each person, it's extremely important to view them with fresh eyes and an open heart, and not go, oh, well, this sounds just like, you know, what such and such told me or their story from a few weeks ago. So I've already got that figured out and I already know exactly what I need to do to put them in their place because they're, you know, somehow horrible for
being poor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, again, I mean, it is exactly like the story in Job, you know, where Job is being, you know, assaulted by all these things and the devil's going after him and the friends come and they're like, what did you do to get here? Like we said earlier, I think people's instinct to make it black and white and simple to avoid their own pain and their own confusion and their own really responsibility for it is to make it a moral failure and something you did and you deserve this. Right. So therefore, like, I have criticism and judgment for you. Yeah.
I think, you know, if you're going to go even further beyond all of that too, it's like, you know, at the end of the day, like, I shouldn't really have to have conversations like this where I'm talking about people that are homeless or people that are in physical poverty because, you know, if the world was perfect, you know, then we would all just view those individuals as like they're living their own life and they're figuring things out too. You know, like there are people who are in lower income brackets that know Jesus better than I do.
Absolutely.
You know, that are
people will school you in some scripture.
That are much more fulfilled in their lives that, you know, and that is just where their income level lines up for their life, you know? And I do think that there is, you know, a spirit of poverty that people can have, but that be more focused in like a scarcity mentality or viewing everything through the lens of, not really, wanting to pursue more or have bigger dreams. I personally don't think that you know, more or bigger dreams looks like every individual moving out of poverty into middle or upper class or the American dream. But again, I think that goes back to like,
please don't.
Right.
Yeah.
I think again, what that goes back to is just like we view poverty and homelessness through such a negative lens that it's like you've done something wrong. You're horrible if you're having to work paycheck to paycheck. You know, you're less than if you're working a minimum wage job. And like none of those things are true.
Yeah. In order to be happy and content and at peace, you have to get out of that category. Yes,
exactly. And so, you know, it definitely is not, I'm not saying like I, you know, went downtown day one and I had all of these thoughts, you know, it's definitely over the years and through a lot of different relationships. But I think, you know, instead of me going like, this is what you need to do and this is how you can move forward and this is what I think your life should look like, it's going, you know, it's asking questions like, what do you think your life is supposed to look like?
So
Who has
good.
God called you to be? And how can I support you in that timeline that is probably going to take longer than a year? And,
yeah, absolutely.
That really just kind of being a huge part of the deconstructing those myths and misconceptions.
Well, I think it's a good point to the other key point that I love about you and the staff is like, it's the relationship piece that makes everything work.
Right.
And that means it might take 6 years, like you said about the lady earlier.
Yeah.
And our system in America is not set up for that. We want immediate gratification. We want a system that fixes and gets us from poverty to middle class.
Yeah.
Under the idea that by getting to middle class or upper class, you'll be happy.
Right, exactly.
And it's like I sit with people every day who make $100,000 to $1 million to $5 million who are miserable human beings emotionally and spiritually.
Right, exactly.
They're so impoverished from their trauma and from their lack of knowledge and their shame. I would rather, that's what I said earlier about hanging out with people to Lovewell, you know what you're going to get too.
Exactly.
Like, you know where you stand with people. People are appreciative. People love you, but people also are confident in themselves and in the Lord. And they could go home to a small apartment and end up serving way more people on a weekly basis and loving on people than somebody who makes $1 million a year.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. One of our Lovewell members, who's also part of VIP Club, she and her son moved a couple months ago from the apartment they were in to a different one. And I was just talking to her about how she was feeling about that because she had been at that previous apartment for quite a while. And she was like, and these were both low-income apartments, and she was like, I'm feeling okay about it. I think part of it is that, there are a couple individuals that live in my apartment complex that I really try to make an effort to take a meal to or to visit with or to bring together because they live alone. And, it just was one of those moments where I was reminded, like, that is so much more of the gospel than you moving out of this low-income apartment into like one of the nicest in Shreveport, for you to then potentially be in your apartment and not interact with anyone. Like, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't, be beneficial to have some nicer amenities probably, but sure. Like, that's so much more of the gospel, but we sometimes, and especially in American Christianity, we view the gospel as like
prosperity.
Yes. And like we move to like bigger and better. And I'm not saying that safer. Yeah. And I'm not saying the Lord doesn't bless people with amazing things, and I'm not saying it's horrible to be rich, because we need people that are rich to help fund things that we do like this. So I'm not saying any of that, but I just mean like, I think when you have so many expectations on what someone's end goal or success looks like, you're just like setting yourself up to either A, not appreciate their journey, or B, think that you could have done it better or figured it out more. And then that brings about that whole God complex that we can often have over someone's life.
Absolutely. What, we're covering a lot of it, but what are some specific maybe myth busters that you want to make sure that you leave here kind of telling people?
Yeah. I would say I would want individuals to know that those that are homeless or in poverty are not unintelligent, are not uncaring, or don't want the best for themselves. And that also aren't looking to harass other people. I would also want individuals to know, like, being able to expand my views and my perspective because I've spent time with someone else that doesn't look like me and doesn't have the same, economic status as I do. Is so much more meaningful, and that's really the only way through any subject, doesn't have to be just related to poverty, that you really will begin to see your ideas change or your opinions change.
And just how wrong you are.
Yeah, and just how wrong you are, exactly. Yep. So it's funny because one time, Eric, our previous director, he and I were having a conversation with one of our Lovewell members, and this was after knowing him for a pretty long while, and we asked him, like, what was your, you're like, what was your first impression of me? Like, once you become good friends and you feel like you can ask that honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, honestly, it wasn't about anything that you gave me or offered me. It was the fact that you remembered my name.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that didn't require anything from me other than, remembering his name.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, people, again, it's so easy. And even knowing it, and, we said this before, even knowing it, like you said, we can get caught up in that, barrier of like seeing a homeless person and thinking something negative. But yeah, so many times just saying, like, it's been really funny, and I know you've had this experience, but for me, it's different because I don't work at the Hub full time. So people, I mean, in some ways, they look at you and they're like, oh, well, you do that, so that's why you have this mentality. Yeah. But it's been crazy to be a therapist or a professional in the way that in my role or whatever, dressed like I'm dressed, going downtown for what I could be a lawyer or anybody else. Mm-hmm. And then I stop and see Frank or somebody, somebody from the Lovewell, and I'm like, what's up? How's it going? See you Wednesday. And I'm with a group of people who would have never even saw that human being.
Right. Yeah.
And that's been such a weird, it's hard because it's like I want to get really mad at friends, but then also like I was that person before I did any of this.
Yeah. That's one of the like pillars that Cassie, our founder, really, strives for all of us to understand, especially when it comes to introducing a volunteer or somebody to the Lovewell new for the first time, of like, we were all on whatever level someone comes in for the first time. We were at that place ourselves.
Yes.
And so our job is to help support and lead someone through building their own relationships to then have their own opportunities for their, again, opinions to be changed or viewpoints to be expanded.
Yeah. And I'm going to point to that story, of course, is not the virtue signal for me.
Right,
but to say anybody can do it.
Yeah.
Right. We're not special and unique to be in this situation. We just have some information like we're talking about today that can allow people to step into it. Because I think people, and we've talked to them 100 times, volunteers, people have a misconception. They don't know all this we're talking about. And so they have fear about people, about danger, about, what this is going to be like, what it's going to take from them. And me being able to walk around downtown and say hey to people and give people hugs and do those kind of things when I'm going somewhere, like there's so much freedom in that. I love it. It's the best thing ever. But it's because I know this person's not trying to harm me.
Right.
They're not just here because of that reason. Some of them, you're like, well, I know he chooses to be there because here's his mission in life and this is what he's doing. And but the only reason we know that is because we've been in relationship with them. Right.
And we've chosen. You have to be willing to choose the discomfort.
Of like, it's not comfortable.
It's not comfortable, but you have to be willing, like, even for me, I still face this at times. Like, I just was talking to somebody else about this recently, but people, just assume like, oh, she's the one who knows all these people down here. So, it's easy for her all the time. And it's still, a learning process for me. But, going back to the very beginning of like the panhandling, like for us, it's like we feel this initial sense of discomfort of like, oh, here's someone here that like, do I need to acknowledge them? Do I not? I don't really want to. But if I do, then they're probably going to ask me for money, and
I don't have time
for this, or I don't know what they're going to ask me. And, just it's all a sense of wanting to have control. And so being willing to give into that moment and just go, you know what, I'm just going to offer a smile and a hello. And if they ask me for something, then I'm just going to trust, obviously if you're a Christian, to just trust that the Holy Spirit is going to lead to what I need to do in that moment. And that's the same for every other situation when we have people come down to the Lovewell or when I'm meeting someone new for the first time. No one teaches you how to have friends.
Right.
Or like no one teaches you how to interact or have emotions. Like that's not a subject in school.
Right.
Which I wish it was because that would be nice.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, you're working on it. And so I think, in general settings, we meet someone and we're either getting to know them because of a shared interest or a hobby, or we're at the same church or we've been in school. And so there's just an easier avenue. So then when you're in a different setting that looks completely opposite of yours, it's easy to feel like, well, there has to be no common ground because there's nothing for me to initially work off of. But if you think about it, you know, we all experience insecurities. We all experience moments of doubt, of wanting to be seen and heard and known. And so those are the things, if you're willing to lean into that and the discomfort and just start with like, hey, my name is Sarah. Are you from Shreveport? You know, and just start with that. Then that oftentimes changes the game for sure. Because people know, our Lovewell members, those that are experiencing homelessness, poverty, like they know how society views them. Mm-hmm. They know. And so when someone is willing to help them to have a moment where they go, well, maybe society in general, but I know this person doesn't view me that way. Like that's a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we forget that they spend their whole life, people not looking at them, people turning their eye, people not making eye contact, people not saying, hey.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, again, there's that misconception. Oh, they probably make $100 a day, you know, just standing outside Target. It's like, okay, that's not what happens.
Right.
But yeah, it's tough, man.
Yeah.
I think that's some of the barriers that, you know, when we talk about why don't people come and volunteer who are Christians. So can we talk about that a little bit? What do you think some of the barriers to maybe the church coming and helping, or people coming and helping, are when it comes to serving poverty, being at the Lovewell?
I think probably one of the biggest things that all of us fight is busyness, and deciding what is more important than something else. And so, you know, it does take time and effort to be willing to, you know, go somewhere or to commit to building a relationship with someone that may take 4 or 5 years to, you know, see fruit. But it also being a sense of like, it should be fruit on both sides. It's not supposed to be a one-sided interaction.
That's good.
And
you're not bringing everything to them.
No, you're not bringing everything to them. I guarantee you they know a lot more than you think they do. And that's part of it as well, is like, you know, we've really tried over the last few years to kind of do away and blur the lines of this like volunteer Lovewell member mentality, because in some ways that still separates the two of us. Yep. Instead of, you know, going like, all of us experience brokenness, all of us experience poverty, maybe not physically, but we all experience that emotional, spiritual, relational poverty that we're all working towards growing and becoming more like who God called us to be. And so I'm going just with my hands open, not with them full to try to put into someone else what I think that they need to know. So again, I think, you know, that's a little bit of a side tangent, but that is part of the framework that is helpful for people to have before they show up. You know, even at our Tuesday night community meal, unfortunately, we've had to change some things because of COVID, but like in general, we've moved to like, this is not necessarily an event that people are coming to. This is just an opportunity for all of us to sit down and eat together.
Yeah, because what we've realized, I think, is that we would rather have consistent people who show up and few than 1,500 churches that come in for a weekend and leave and don't come back.
Right. And
not that those aren't helpful.
Right, exactly. I'm like, and it's not that, you know, we're so super appreciative of anyone who wants to give and help and whatever. I think it's, you know, just knowing that means you may have to do it a little bit differently than how you envisioned it to be, especially if it doesn't align, you know, with our vision or our mission or things like that. So I think that is busyness, again, is one of the biggest hindrances in just recognizing, like, you know, what am I putting my time and attention to? And are all of these things that I'm doing, you know, as much of a huge advocate as I am for the church and the church building, sometimes life is spent inside the church building more than it is outside of those four walls. And, you know, obviously each individual has to decide for themselves what that looks like. But the hope is that you just begin to bring someone into relationship in your life, and they become a part of your community, you become a part of their community, and it not feel like this mission trip that you're doing, you know. And so people just having the opportunity to just make the time and don't come in with any expectations. Just come in with an open heart and open hands, and know that it is going to be uncomfortable at first, possibly, but that's not because of the individual. That's just because it's just awkward to get to know someone new for the first time anyway.
Absolutely.
And just general, circumstances.
Yeah, I think, again, you have to remember they're human beings, and they're coming to the table with all their insecurities and all their worries and all their things as much as you are.
Right.
And I think if we show up like, hey, we're going to just be in a relationship and learn from one another, it goes a long way. I mean, I know, man, I've learned so much, teaching classes, being up there, and just being in relationship with people over the years. And some got really close for several years and, hung out with and had coffee with and would pick up and bring and help get on meds and, all the things. And man, those relationships, I still cherish and, still reach out to some people who've moved and you can't understand how much that gives to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when Luke and I got married, there were a couple individuals that I had, gotten to know through the Lovewell, but, are kind of, I call them like the OGs, like the people that I've known since day one, that like there was no hesitation that I was inviting them, or that we were inviting them to our wedding, but it not being like look at this.
Yeah, look at what we're doing.
Yeah. No, it was just like that was it. And like, you obviously know that Luke and I are in the process of adoption, and I've already, just kind of dreamed like, if and when we have a baby shower, like, if we can have like a standard shower, depending upon where we're at in COVID.
Well, hey, Texas just really let all the walls down in Mississippi, apparently.
I saw that. Like who would I want to invite? And like, there were several individuals that I know from the Lovewell that like, I definitely want them to be there. And that's not for any other reason than I have relationship with them and they have relationship with me, and it's important for us to be able to experience that new thing together.
For sure. What do you think, let's, I know that one of the books you love and recommend is When Helping Hurts, right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
How does the church sometimes do more harm than good, even well-intentioned, right?
Yeah.
When helping people in poverty or homelessness?
So there is this really big concept that When Helping Hurts talks about, which is a really good book. It's called When Helping Hurts, How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting, I think it's the poor and yourself, or either yourself and the poor. I can't remember the order. And they do really bring about that concept of poverty being not just related to a lack of physical things, but experiencing brokenness in your relationship with God, self, others, and creation. And so that means like if you're a workaholic and you put your job and making money as more of a priority than your family or your spiritual health, that is just as much poverty as it is not working or not having any drive or desire to be a steward.
We got a lot of that.
Yeah. So like, and then, cause then that's where you go like, oh, so like maybe my poverty looks a little different, but like I am experiencing that too. So there's this even level playing field that happens. So it's like we're all figuring it out and striving, together to become more of who God created us to be. So that is a big part. That is one of that book is such a foundational one. It really, I felt like, put words to things that we had kind of already been circulating in our culture, but didn't really have a full way of how we wanted to explain that. But the other part of that book talks through this idea of, poverty alleviation through kind of 3 steps. The first is relief, the second is rehabilitation, and then development. And relief, which is the first stage, is the one that a lot of times we in America and sometimes even the church gets stuck on. And that is kind of trying to cover a plug or cover a Band-Aid in a crisis situation, and that being the only model that's used for the long term. Now, obviously, there are moments where, like, for example, we had this winter storm that just happened, and there were people that were out without water. That doesn't mean that you then need to be charging all these people to pay for the water. Like giving the water away for free was like very vital and essential.
Yeah. And we had a lot of churches who got behind that and gave away thousands of things of water, which is amazing.
Right. So amazing. But if you're specifically looking at like, if I'm going to go and invest and try to just support someone out of homelessness, that's why we don't have the free handout model. And see, again, it's just like, there are moments where we do have a free meal. That's just, to spark community. So it's not saying that's wrong, but like for long-term change, you have to be willing to move into, okay, a lot of relief is based on what can I do, or how am I going to impart my knowledge into your culture, or your circumstance, or your situation, versus that rehabilitation going like, what do you think that your situation needs to look like, or how do you want to move forward? What skills and assets do you already have, versus, just looking at everything through a sense of lacking. And really rehabilitation being more of this concept of empowering and supporting someone to, be able to move into that new goal or dream or past their situation, but it being one where if you were to walk away, then they aren't left high and dry to figure it out or scrambling, because you've equipped them and you've supported them through their own point of view and perspective and understanding in a way that it makes sense to them. And then that development is moving forward in a way where they're now able to replicate and duplicate back into their communities that makes sense for them.
Yeah.
So even things as simple as like, if you are going to another country, or you're going to where there's a crisis, like, maybe instead of you gathering all the supplies in your city and going down to wherever that crisis is, or going to that country and bringing it, you work with the employers or the businesses that are already there. You bring the money so that you invest into that community, and you've got people who already understand that culture, who already understand that community, and you allow them to use their resources and their knowledge to then build up in a way that makes sense for them. So then when you leave, it's not like all of a sudden, again, that people are left high and dry.
Yeah, there's a vacuum.
Yeah, exactly. And
we see this when, David Platt, other great missionary type people have this mentality and are trying to teach the church this as well. And some people do it really good and some people don't. But, I think somebody said the difference between like an evangelical trip and a mission trip, right? Evangelical trip is going to Mexico, where there's already churches, there's already Christians, there's already people, and you go and help somebody who's impoverished, and that's a great thing.
Right.
But if you don't go and empower the Christians in that community to raise a church on their own, and then them become missionaries, right, to other places. That's the incredible thing about like China, is like China, if you're a Christian in China, they're coming to America, they're going to, they're going to Indonesia, they're going to, Australia. And we don't think about that like that as an American Christian. Sometimes we think we're going as an American church to bring the gospel to the nations.
Right.
And it's like, no, they their goal is to build that up within themselves. And I think that's what you're saying about poverty.
Yeah. This is a little bit of a side note, but Luke and I were just having a conversation the other day about just, these underground churches in other parts of the world. And like, to us, we in the American church may view that as like, that's not it, in the sense of like, if it's not this massive building where you've got all these extra things going
and all these freedoms,
then that's not the gospel, or that's not really the church moving. And, sometimes that being actually, that's the exact opposite of what the gospel really is. But so I think some of that is all tied into just this idea of like, we just want to pump a bunch of relief into a moment that may not necessarily need relief anymore.
Yeah, we've seen those videos of like people sending clothes over,
Right.
or different resources over, and then after it's over, there's these piles and piles of garbage that now the people have to get rid of because nobody fits it, or it doesn't work for their culture, or they're not going to wear it, or they're not going to use it, and and it makes them even more of a mess.
Yeah, and so, you know, I think it's so important to recognize though that the gospel is both the mission, social justice, which I know is a weighty word sometimes in the Christian church, but the social justice and the spreading the news of who Jesus is, like it's all of that. It's not one or the other, but I think sometimes the way you do that is going like, hey, you know, I'm going to go take this bag of goodies to this apartment complex and just, you know, visit with some folks and let them know like, hey, if you're in need of any resources, this is what's available. Offer prayer, or, you know, how can we, you know, just support you, but then also like giving some sort of next step, because, you know, that individual may close the door and be in like an abusive situation, and like it's not probably going to do anything if we just like show up and give that free bag. Like that's not really going to mean anything in that moment, you know, for the long term. It may be a bright spot in their day in that moment. And I'm not saying don't do that. Yeah, you have to preface everything like I'm not saying, you know, but I think that you have to be willing to think through like the long term for a situation and go like, what is going to be most beneficial for this person or this community that maybe takes me out of the equation fully, but is supporting them and empowering them to move forward, or, you know, to meet their goals, or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, taking us out of the equation, I was always a pro in these situations. What, tell me what kind of you guys are, we touched on the VIP program for a second, but, and I'll just cover it real quick. But, you know, one of the things that I think you saw and Cassie saw and most of us that are on staff saw was that, you know, we were helping really well, we were doing really well, but there were individuals within the program who really needed some extra things. So talk about the VIP program for just a second and what that offers people. And
So the VIP club was birthed out of this just realization between myself and Cassie and our former director, Eric, of recognizing that oftentimes once an individual moves out of homelessness into stable housing, whether that be, you know, through a housing voucher, or they've got some sort of government assistance that's covering their rent, or maybe they even, you know, now have a job that's supplying the rent payment for that, oftentimes they move into those apartments and there's just kind of this like, what now? You know, we've known individuals that have been homeless for years, finally get an apartment and will pitch a tent that they were sleeping in outside in the apartment because that's more comfortable to them. Like it's like this foreign, you know, thing for them to all of a sudden have a bed and four walls. And, you know, even over the winter shelter, granted, she said it was kind of making her back hurt, but like one of our Lovewell members, she decided to sleep on the hard floor versus the cot because that just kind of made more sense to her. And so we were just recognizing that sometimes those supportive services are no longer available, whether that's just through funding or just particular agencies just aren't able to assist anymore. And also sometimes people's community changes. Like if you've built a community downtown or in wherever you've been living, and then all of a sudden you're living across town and you're just kind of, you know, in this place of like, I don't know who my people are, or I can't see those that I was with before. And so we really wanted to help individuals who really wanted to just be able to assess, you know, how has living in physical poverty or homelessness affected me spiritually, emotionally, neurologically? How has it really caused me trauma? And be able to kind of deconstruct all of that and process that, and then move forward into thinking about, okay, how do I now rebuild and move forward? and to the goals and dreams that I have. And they do that all within the context of community through the Lovewell. So right now we have around 12 individuals that are part of the VIP club, and they're all at various phases from 1 to 5. And they have made that commitment themselves to show up on Thursdays. And like I said earlier, they have certain classes that are based on phases that are exploring their relationship with God or themselves or other people. They're also kind of just working on some goals that they have that they want to see as they just rebuild new healthy habits or continue healthy habits that they already had. And then also just decide, like, after I exit out of VIP, like, what do I want to be doing, or where do I want to be going with my life? And so it just allows people the ability, again, to process what they've experienced, but also to just find community. We have fun together. We, on some Thursdays go, we call it Fifth Thursday Fun Day. Just having a little fun there. And we, go to the movies, or we go get ice cream, or we go to play putt-putt, just to build and just have fun together and help individuals see other parts of the city that they may not have ever had the chance to before, just because of their circumstances. And so, it can be messy at times, but as is everything else in life, if you're really like digging deep and working hard. And it's just been really cool to see people, all we did was, offer this opportunity. They chose it, and they've taken advantage of it. And they do have their own member perks that are specific to VIP Club that those that are in general level membership don't have. So they do have access to a monthly bus pass, or if they're driving, we compensate that with some gas money. They also have a grocery stipend. And then they have access to certain just resource assistance that may not be available otherwise. But we still have the point system in place. So, you still have to earn the points in order to have the ability to get that grocery card or to get that bus pass. It's just that, others outside of VIP just don't have all of that access. Yeah. So, yeah, it's been really cool. Again, I've mentioned an individual who's graduated and seeing her work and, knowing like I just got a backseat to all of that. It's just super cool. We have another VIP member that graduated. She's currently a full-time student in culinary arts. And I can't even tell you the number of times that she said to me, like, it's just so fulfilling and moving to be able to be here now and to give back, because she volunteers all the time, and know that, like, I'm now getting to give back in ways that I couldn't before because I was needing the assistance myself.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, it's just one big happy little family down there.
It really is, yeah. And just like a family, there's conflict and there's chaos.
Yes.
I know you had a lot of stuff, over the shelter that was chaotic, and we had some very sad situations. And, so let's talk about that a little bit. I think one of the things that's hard about doing what we do, and you and I talked about this last week and have talked about it before, but kind of putting the genie back in the bottle. And so when this is the cost of doing the work, right? Is that being a therapist, working at the Lovewell, working with Purchased, learning what we learn, we can't unknow it.
Right.
And so can you talk a little bit about like what that's like for you and your heart? And
oh man, that is quite the topic. Yes. So I think it's like, I wouldn't change for anything. The exposure or experience or just the understanding of brokenness that I've come to learn over the years. But there is this constant reality of knowing, like you said, you can't unknow what you already know. So the experience that we had over the winter shelter, where, we found out that one of our Lovewell members had passed away, it was and is still so devastating because, our staff member Joel, like I can't even tell you the number of people that he helped transport to other shelters once we got full, or hotels, and the number of times we went looking to make sure everybody had been accounted for and brought in. And so you think like you've got everybody, and then to find out that wasn't the case, was super devastating. Also because it was like at the end of a really long day. It was a good day, but a really hard day. And so, that was, just knowing that, there is no real way to mask, the realities of the brokenness in our world. But I think, being able to learn, like, at the end of the day, though, because of my relationship with Jesus and knowing who God is, like, that's where I just have to give all of that to him and trust that, like, he sees every individual more than I'm ever capable of doing.
Yeah.
And also that he wants and desires for them more than I ever could. There are literally some days where I'll leave, and, oftentimes there is no resolve for someone. It's not like, you get to the Lovewell and you start with someone and you're assisting them, or you hear a story of brokenness, and it's like it's an open wound that just gets left open.
Yep.
And so I'll have to literally just be like, okay, God, I'm just giving this to you because I literally cannot, if I don't, then I'm not going to be able to function, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
And also understanding, like, it's not easy, but when I go home, like, Luke and the family that we've created deserves just as much attention in that moment as do the Lovewell members when I'm at the Lovewell, or the community or the family, or when I'm at church. Now, that may mean I'll, cry or break down, I had this instance at church recently, and I don't know if he'll end up listening to this podcast, but I had this incident recently where we had a separate Lovewell member pass away, and he didn't have any family that claimed him, and so we worked it out with another organization to be able to provide a little, like, celebration of life and funeral for him. Through working with Hope House and through the Holy Cross Church they have an amazing little garden for people that they can be buried if they don't have any family accounted for. But we had to pick up his ashes, and we were storing them in the attic of the Lovewell until we were able to have the funeral. And I remember getting to the Lovewell that day and Nathan being like, this is this individual's ashes here, and because of what we had going on during that day, I was like, okay, that's just kind of like, I'm just gonna pin that right, I'm just gonna pin that right there, and like it didn't really register. Went a whole day. It was a long day, but there's just a lot of stuff that happened on Thursdays, and then we were at church that night for our young adult service, and our pastor said something towards the end of the message, and the band had come back up, and he said something that just somehow set off for me, like, that realization that was just so heartbreaking to me, and I just could not stop crying. And afterwards he was like, hey, you doing okay? It was just so kind of him to come and ask that. I'm like, we just had this person's ashes, I can't even get the full concept. So it sounds so bizarre, but those are just sometimes where you have to give yourself grace to know that it's okay to feel the weight of that brokenness, but to not sit in it, because there is still so much hope.
Yeah.
There still is so much goodness in the world, and grace and mercy, and for every really hard situation, there's hundreds of really good ones that you get to see people's lives changed and restored, and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you really do get to see the work of Christ in a way that people don't get to see it. And I know people have asked you this, and people are, how do you do that all day? Or how do you, and it's like, well, we can't, and we don't, right? The Holy Spirit is working in us. We're broken. We're learning. I mean, we're getting better at what we do through God and through our work together and through community. But I challenge people who are listening, to find a place to plug in, because you're missing out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're choosing some stuff. You're going to choose to be uncomfortable. You're going to choose pain. You're going to choose suffering. But like Paul talks about, you don't get the resurrection without the suffering.
Right.
And I think in America, we're so geared to being comfortable. And that comfort, and that the peace of God is comfort. That the peace of God that surpasses all understanding is comfort. And it's like, no, it's not. It's more complicated than that. It surpasses all understanding, because you can be at peace and be in the midst of a storm. You can be in pain. You can be in suffering. But yeah, like we talked about the other day, it's such a balance, because you know how bad things are.
Yeah.
There's a snowstorm coming or weather, and the first thing you're thinking is about, John or Shelley or whoever is, down there, and I'm making up names, but, you have specific people. Yeah. It's the same way when I hear about a pastor falling, or some kind of mental health situation, or somebody having an affair. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're going through some stuff, and they were saying, yeah, nobody knows, but I don't talk about it, because when I'm in small group, people's responses to affairs let me know I can't be honest. Yeah. And it's like that with poverty. So if you're out there and you're walking around and you're seeing a homeless person, how you respond and what you learn from this podcast or any other books that you can read, it has a missional quality, because even if you don't come to the level tomorrow, you don't go serve someone, the first step you can do is learn and start treating people differently. Right. Because people are watching you.
Yeah. They are, for sure. I mean, going back to the winter shelter, there was an individual that did not come to the shelter that I was pretty sure she did not make it to any other shelter. And she lives out of downtown further away, and I just had not been able to communicate with her. And so, while we've got this amazing opportunity to house all these individuals in the Lovewell, in the very back of my mind, I'm thinking, like, where is this person? And I still haven't seen her yet. Now, I did have someone. As of today? Yeah, as of today, I haven't seen her yet. And I'm like vaguely familiar with where she stays, and Luke and I even went and looked for her the other day, with no luck. But it's still like it's attention. Yeah. And I did have someone mention to me that they were like almost 100% positive they saw her riding her bike the other day. But it's still like until my eyes see her. And so
it's a piece of your heart, right? Yeah. I mean, that's also the cost, is like you don't get to be completely at peace, quote unquote. Right.
It's the same individual that her and I ran into each other in Kroger and just had a really good conversation. She was shopping, I was shopping, finished, and then she comes to the Lovewell the next week and was like, hey, I got these coupons from Kroger. I don't really think I'm going to use them, so I wanted to give them to you. Like, that's just... it's such a cliche word, but like living life, but like that's just what it is. It's just choosing to have relationship with people who look different from you, or who have different backgrounds, but knowing that at the core of it, all of you experience the same emotions and thoughts and feelings, and want to be loved and to be known and valued. Absolutely.
This has been awesome. What closing kind of thoughts, comments do you have, things that you would like anybody to know?
Yeah, we kind of have these 3 words, or 3 phrases that our Lovewell team tries really hard to just take note of every day, and that's and it's kind of one that I adopted myself first and wanted to share with the team, but it's to listen well and to notice others and to be present, and that stands for anyone, no matter if you're homeless or if you're in poverty, but just the importance of like being instead of doing, and knowing that shout out John Mark Comer. Yeah, right. And so just this concept of like life is so much more meaningful and worth it when you're willing to pay attention to other people, or to notice someone who's not at the center of attention, or to check in on people, to be present and not thinking about what's coming next. And so, I use all of that to say, like, no matter who you come in contact with throughout the day, that just being so vital for anyone in every situation.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I'm so proud of you, Sarah. You do such an amazing job. It's like I tell you, you're one of my favorite people on the planet. And I've gotten to see you grow in leadership as a person, as a wife, and now hopefully soon as a mom.
Yeah.
And, I'm honored for you to do this with me and to talk about these things. If you're out there and you don't, you've heard this and the Holy Spirit's stirring in your heart to do more, reach out to Sarah at the Lovewell, reach out to us at the Hub. There's plenty of events that you can check out online that you can get plugged into. If you're not in this city and this is something that resonates with you, there are resources we can give you to start one in your city. There are things we can do to help, books resources, all kinds of things. So please reach out. I'll say this because you won't, but if you have money and you want to give it, the Hub, can always use that money. The things we talk about with missional, pray, pay, or go. Mm-hmm. And so you can do one of those three things. You can, if you're not in a place where you can, go everywhere. Like for me, life has changed having kids, and I can't always go to everything. But because of our practice, I can pay a little bit more, and I can pray for sure.
Right.
And then hopefully there's other seasons where I can go back and do more things. And so try not to judge yourself for where you're at, but do something.
Yeah.
And I think that would be the biggest thing that I would tell everybody to do. So, if you need something and you're out there and you are in poverty and you're listening to this podcast, find a resource, find a place in your town, find a place around you where people are trustworthy and who can see you for who you are, because you're not alone and you are loved and you are valued, and what you bring to the table is enough. That the only thing you have to do to have value in God's eyes is breathe and be alive.
Yeah. And
so if you're out there and you're listening to this and you've struggled with poverty, know that there are people like Sarah and like our staff. And I'll say this for you, there's an incredible staff at the Lovewell who does amazing things, and every one of them has a heart. And to see you guys over this last couple of weeks with, no water and no place to be, no place to go, icy roads, and all of you guys stepped up in such an incredible way to help people that were in need. And it was really just the body of Christ in the hands and feet of Christ. So proud of y'all.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. That's episode 21. Subscribe on YouTube. Do all the things you know how to do. Give us a review on iTunes if you want. Share this podcast. Love you guys. God bless you, and have a good day. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.